A financial system should function as an engine for long-term capability. Instead, the pacing of modern capital crushes the structures it's meant to build. Over the last few decades, we have reached a peak in analytical sophistication and market liquidity. Yet, in that same window, corporate investment horizons have drastically contracted. Standard academic explanations often treat this as a human error. They point to behavioral biases, misaligned incentives, or the principal agent problem. That these are effects. They describe participant behavior without accounting for the physics of the arena. Market short-termism is a deterministic outcome of a structural flaw. It is the result of a specific condition, temporal market misalignment. To understand why markets fail to support long-horizon value, we have to analyze institutional architecture as a temporal system, one governed by the timing of its rules rather than the intent of its actors. This model relies on two variables. First, there are capital cycles, represented as K. Second, there are mission cycles, represented as M, the physical and organizational time required to generate real economic value. In a regenerative system, capital cycles align with mission cycles. But in modern markets, capital is mediated by a cycle coupling operator, which we call gamma. Gamma forces a system to inherit the volatility and cadence of external signals. This formalizes the logic of short-termism. Capital at any given time is the result of gamma applied to F, the fragility cycles. This coupling dictates that capital follows cycles that operating firms do not control. It makes capital availability dependent on variables that do not reflect a firm's productive capacity. What analysts often mistake for informational efficiency in volatile pricing is actually a temporal artifact. It is the noise produced by the coupling of capital to fragility. We can quantify these fragility cycles precisely. They include quarterly earnings reports on a 90-day loop, civic sentiment oscillating every 6 to 18 months, and political turnover disrupting regulations every 2 to 4 years. Mission cycles follow a different logic. Innovation takes 3 to 10 years. Platform ecosystem build-out takes 5 to 15 years. Physical asset renewal, like a manufacturing plant, requires up to 30 years of continuity. This chart shows the structural gap. The orange and yellow bars on the left represent short-term fragility cycles. Compare those to the blue and purple mission cycles. The physical distance between these clusters defines temporal market misalignment. There is no overlap. Because market capital is bound to the short-duration fragility cluster, it is incapable of supporting the long-duration mission cluster. Firms are structurally compelled into short-term optimization. They are optimizing for the wrong clock. This temporal constraint dictates all executive behavior. Across global markets, median CEO tenure has fallen to just 4 to 5 years. Since 2000, the red line tracking median CEO tenure has moved steadily downward, reaching 4.8 years. It now falls below the yellow dashed line, the minimum innovation cycle. This shaded red structural gap means completing one full innovation mission is physically impossible. We also have to account for how a CEO is evaluated. Boards and analysts score leadership on quarterly optics, not multi-year capability. To survive their evaluation window, executives enter harvest mode. They pull future earnings forward and delay maintenance to stabilize the optics of the current quarter. Activist investors act as major fragility accelerators. By threatening proxy contests, they compress these horizons even further, down to 12 or 24 months. Short-termism is a deterministic result of an architecture where the leader's horizon is shorter than the mission's horizon. The market points to institutional investors, pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, as the providers of patient capital. These large entities operate with 50-year mandates, but their 50-year intent collapses into 90-day behavior. This happens because of operational reporting rules and mandatory liquidity tests. That long horizon is shredded by consultant review cycles that evaluate managers annually and benchmark indices that recalibrate every 3 months. In practice, benchmarks operate as fragility cycles. Missing a benchmark for a single quarter can trigger manager termination, regardless of the 50-year goal. Public funds face further disruption from trustee and ministerial turnover. This reintroduces political fragility into the management of long-term endowments. Stewardship codes and voluntary pledges fail because they cannot modify the temporal rules of the market. They are moral requests made to a system governed by mathematical constraints. Long-term investing is structurally impossible inside a market architecture governed by fragility cycles. Realignment requires a new set of architectural operators. The first is decoupling. This means capital availability must be independent of quarterly pricing or sentiment shocks. It is implemented through multi-cycle capital pools, where capital is locked to a specific mission duration. The second operator is alignment. This requires capital to synchronize with the phase of the mission. Instead of quarterly reports, firms move to mission cycle reporting. If an R&D project takes 7 years, the progress is measured and the capital is released on a 7-year cadence, not a 90-day one. This forms the alignment criterion. A system only functions correctly when capital is both decoupled from noise and aligned to the mission. Reform is not about changing behavior through incentives. It is about embedding these operators into a temporal constitution, a set of governance rules that define the duration of authority and the frequency of review. We must shift from trying to encourage the long term to architecting the rules that make the short term irrelevant. We can evaluate current capital instruments against these structural requirements. Every major capital instrument today fails. Public equity, venture capital, and corporate debt lack necessary decoupling and alignment. Even private capital fails. Funds with fixed 7 to 10-year lifetimes force asset sales, regardless of their mission cycle. The alternative is an institutional design we call regenerative capital markets. In this model, capital pools are multi-cycle, and executive incentives are tied to the completion of the mission, not the movement of the stock price. This allows capital to follow the cadence of innovation rather than the cadence of sentiment. It turns the market into a system that compounds capability rather than harvesting it. To produce regenerative value, we must stop managing firms by the quarterly clock and start architecting capital to the time frame of the mission.